তো সবাই দেখতে পাচ্ছ তো স্ক্রিন?
Yes, ma'am.
আচ্ছা, okay. So basically we are going to start with this particular PowerPoint is on Fraunhofer diffraction, and this is a picture I just wanted to share with you, which I got on the internet, which is a picture showing the natural, because we usually we study diffraction in the laboratory and we see the pattern on the screen, but this is a picture where it shows how naturally also diffraction can be seen. You can see that there are small gaps in the clouds through which the sunlight is coming in, and it is producing a pattern of alternate dark and bright intensities. So I found the picture to be very fascinating, and so I wanted to share it with you. This is not in particular probably for Fraunhofer or any particular type of diffraction, but it is a naturally occurring process in which light is being diffracted due to small gaps, small openings in a layer of cloud and then falling on the water surface. Okay, so let's start with diffraction. So we studied interference quite thoroughly, different types of interference, and we saw that basically when two coherent waves interfere, when they superpose on each other at a particular point, then they either, the basic idea is that these coherent waves, they have a constant phase relation between them, and when they superpose on each other, either they superpose on each other in phase, thereby enhancing the energy, producing therefore a bright fringe, or they superpose out of phase, thereby reducing their energy and therefore producing a dark fringe. But whatever be the case, we need two disturbances, two waves to interfere. To get the coherent waves, what we do is we use a single source, and then either we produce two wave fronts, we divide the one single wave front into two wave fronts, which then superpose and produce the interference pattern, or we have a thin film or some kind of a medium change which produces a splitting of the amplitude of the incoming wave, so that we get, again we get two waves which are traveling in the same direction, but due to the initial path difference that has been incorporated between them, they have a constant phase difference between them, and therefore when they superpose or made to superpose by an optical device, they produce fringes. So this is how interference is, the two kinds of interference fringes are produced, and we studied them, we spent quite a lot of time studying them. All right, now let's see what diffraction is. What is the idea of diffraction? From where did the idea of diffraction come? In fact, if you go back to our first slide of our first class, you'll see that I told you that when Huygens had given his theory of geometrical method of construction of wavefronts, he did not have any experimental proof. It was at the same time that another person called Grimaldi, he had observed the phenomenon of diffraction, but he could not use Huygens' principle of wave nature of light to uh, give a solid backup to this observation that he had made, and therefore he could not relate the wave phenomena to the phenomena of diffraction that he had observed. Meanwhile, Young's performed the double slit experiment, and he used Huygens' principles to prove the observation, to analyze the observations of his double slit interference, and therefore interference became the first optical phenomena which proved the wave nature of light, and Grimaldi's observation remained just an observation. Okay, so first of all, the idea comes from the fact that the geometrical boundary of the shadow of an obstacle is not sharp. If there is an obstacle in front of a source, then the shadow must have sharp, well-defined boundaries. But it is not so. We do not see well-defined boundaries of a shadow. And also the geometrical boundary of the image of a slit is also not sharp. If you have a slit kept in front of a source, a single slit, and want to see it on a screen, you will not get a sharp image of the slit on the screen. Okay, so this sort of led observers to delve into this phenomena, that what is happening, why aren't we, if light is traveling in straight lines and the then prevailing corpuscular theory, then why are we not getting sharp shadows or sharp images, that is images and shadows with sharp boundaries? It seems as if in both cases some light creeps into the area of the shadow, or some light escapes from the region of the lighted portion into the region of the shadow. This commonly is known as bending of light. As you all have studied a bit of diffraction in your high school, in your plus twos, and you know that in most textbooks commonly diffraction is related to bending of light, as if light which is traveling in a straight line, when it faces an obstacle, it bends. Okay, now this is not possible for an ordinary straight line or a stream of particles to suddenly face an obstacle and bend its direction. So this is a picture of shadow formation, with this is the source and this is an obstacle, and this is a shadow. Apart from the umbra and penumbra region, which is explained by the straight line, the rectilinear propagation of light, there is also some pattern observed at the boundary which is not explainable using this theory. Okay, and then this is a slit kept in front of a source of light from which plane wave fronts are coming, and if you take an image of this slit, you will see that the image is not only of this small aperture, there is a spreading of the image, and the image is not equal to the size of the aperture, nor is it a sharp absolute intensity of the light coming through this aperture. So in both cases it seems that light from this region comes, bends into the region of the shadow, and light from this region bends into the region of the shadow. All right. So now we come to the textbook definition of the phenomenon of diffraction. What is diffraction? How is diffraction defined? So definition, the textbook definition is that it's a general characteristics of wave phenomena, and it occurs whenever a portion of the wavefront is obstacled in some way. So if you go back to these pictures, see here this ball is acting as an obstacle to this wavefront, and here the boundaries of this slit of this aperture are acting as obstacles to this incoming wavefront. All right. So the definition is very rightly put, that is the general characteristics of wave phenomena occurring whenever a portion of the wavefront is obstacled in some way. All right. So this is commonly called bending of light. So what is it like? When light or a wave is facing an obstacle, it tries to bend around that obstacle. All right. Now, this phenomenon of diffraction is not unique for light. It is true for all waves, all kinds of waves. And it has been observed that this bending is related to the wavelength of the wave that is concerned in a particular case. Okay, and it is seen. How is it related? It is pronounced for larger wavelength. Larger the wavelength, more is the bending of the wave. All right. For example, sound waves, which have a typical wavelength of 70 centimeters, and light waves have a typical wavelength of 5 10 to the minus 5 centimeters. All right. Obviously, all of you have observed that bending around obstacles is observed with much more ease in case of sound waves, whereas with light waves it is not as common. Okay, shadows are much more common for light waves. Here I'll ask you to imagine an example. For example, suppose you have a tall pole on which there is a source of light and there is a loudspeaker attached. All right, and then in front of that pole there is some kind of an obstacle, a tree or something, and you are standing on the other side of the tree. All right, so obviously you won't be able to see the light, but if the loudspeaker is on, then you will be able to hear the sound. I mean, it's very common. We sit at our home or we sit in a room and we get to hear sound from far away, distant sources, right? Say the adhan from a masjid, the mm, sound from a loudspeaker where some kind of a say announcement is being carried out, honking of cars. I mean, there are so many obstacles between these sources of sound and where we, the observers, are sitting. But we can still hear the sound in spite of these obstacles between the observer and the source of sound, because sound has a much larger wavelength and they can bend around these obstacles with much more ease. Whereas you cannot possibly see light coming from a source which is far away and where in between you and the source of light there are several obstacles, because light has a much smaller wavelength and it cannot bend around these macroscopic obstacles. It will be able to bend around an obstacle only if the size of the obstacle is of the order of its wavelength. That is why diffraction as a phenomenon is much more commonly observed in case of sound than in light. To observe diffraction of light, you actually have to make setups, proper experimental arrangements in the laboratory. All right. Now, we know Huygens principle. What does Huygens principle say? It says that every point on a wavefront acts as a source of secondary wavelets, right? We have done this, discussed this in detail while doing interference. But this effect, according to Huygens, is only confined to the forward envelope. Remember, Huygens principle does not say anything about the backward envelopes, about what happens to the portions of the wavelets that do not overlap. All right, so this does not explain, it is not sufficient to explain bending of light. So there was Huygens Fresnel's principle. Fresnel's, what he did was, he was the first person to give a theoretical backup for the observed phenomena of diffraction of light, and he added to Huygens principle so that it now is called Huygens Fresnel's principle, and it says that the unobstructed points of the wavefront, they serve as the source of secondary wavelets. Okay, the obstructed parts of the wavefront get obstructed there, but the unobstructed parts, they act as sources of secondary wavelets, and beyond this point of obstruction, it is these wavelets that superpose on each other. Okay, so herein lies the difference between interference and diffraction. Basically, there is no functional difference between interference and diffraction. There is no phenomenological difference between interference and diffraction, in that interference is also because of superposition of wavelets, diffraction is also because of superposition of wavelets. However, interference is possible only if there are two or more waves propagating, whereas in diffraction, even with a single source and a single slit, it is possible to observe the phenomena because the unobstructed portions of the secondary wavelets of the wavefront become sources of secondary wavelets, and they interfere, they superpose with each other, producing the necessary pattern. Okay, once again I am telling you, I cannot see your faces, I do not know whether you are understanding or not. If you have any doubt at any point, please unmute yourselves and ask me the question. I'll try to clarify. All right, okay. So with this short explanation, we do not need further explanation, but we will use this to analyze the phenomenon of diffraction from now on. So this is basically the principle that explains diffraction. Several times it is a tendency of the question setters to give a question, what is the difference between interference and diffraction? You will get it in standard textbooks, but as I told you, there is no phenomenological difference between interference and diffraction. It is only in the observation that you find a difference between the two. There is only observational difference. There is no phenomenological difference. Okay? All right. So now that we know what exactly diffraction is, it is basically bending of light. We have to go over to the categories of diffraction. Basically, there are two categories of diffraction, which is based, the categorization is based on the distance between the screen and the source. To observe the diffraction, we need a source of light and we need a screen on which the pattern will be observed. Depending on the distance between the screen and the source, diffraction is categorized into two types. First, Fresnel diffraction, although we will study this later. We will study the second one first, and then is the Fraunhofer diffraction. I'm sorry, there is a spelling mistake. There will be only one F over here. So what is Fresnel diffraction? In Fresnel diffraction, the source, this is the source and this is the screen, they are at finite distances from the slit. So if this is the slit, this is the source and this is the screen, when the source and the screen are at finite distances from the slit, the kind of diffraction pattern that is produced is known as Fresnel diffraction. Okay. So this is, I mean, it seems to be very obvious. Like in the laboratory, if you set up an apparatus, then the source and the screen will obviously be at finite distances from the slit, and therefore we in general observe Fresnel diffraction if otherwise stated. On the other hand, in Fraunhofer diffraction, the source and the screen are at infinite distance from the slit. Okay, which means that the incident rays on the slit are parallel because they are coming from a source which is infinitely far away, and the parallel rays will have to meet on the screen, which obviously should be placed infinite distance away because we know that parallel rays meet at infinity. So the essence of Fraunhofer diffraction lies in the fact that both the incident rays and the diffracted rays are sets of parallel rays, which is only possible if the source is at infinite distance from the slit and the screen is at infinite distance from the slit. Alright, this is the basic difference between Fraunhofer diffraction and Fresnel diffraction. Now, we will study Fraunhofer diffraction first and then we'll go over to Fresnel diffraction. Fraunhofer diffraction again is of three types: single slit, double slit and multiple slit. So we saw that in Fraunhofer diffraction, source and screen are infinitely far away from the slit. So how do we make this effective in the laboratory? That is the first question that we will address. Before we move into the categorization and the analysis of Fraunhofer diffraction, first let us address the impending question: how do we make the source and screen infinitely distant from the slit? First, we'll keep the source at the focus of a converging lens. Alright, so this is the source and we keep it at the focus of the converging lens so that the emerging rays will be parallel. If you keep the source at the focus of the converging lens, then the emerging rays will be parallel. So these parallel rays here, they will be incident on the slit, and therefore this setup effectively places the source at infinite distance from the slit. This will be slit, sorry. Okay. Next, we have to keep the screen at infinite distance from the slit. So what do? We keep the screen at the focal plane of another converging lens, which is positioned in front of the diffracted rays. Okay. So the screen is positioned at the focal plane of this converging lens, and this converging lens is placed in front of the slit. Alright, so sets of parallel rays which has been diffracted from the slit. So these parallel rays are incident on the slit, okay, from this side, and then they have been diffracted because of this slit, and a particular set of parallel rays that fall on this converging lens. Where will they meet? Since this lens is a converging lens, it will converge the set of parallel refracted rays on the screen, which is placed at the focal plane of the converging lens. Okay, so this is what I mean. So the screen is effectively placed at infinite distance from the source. This will be source, slit, sorry. Typing mistake in both cases. This will be slit and this will be slit. Alright, so this is a very sort of repeated question: how Fraunhofer diffraction is made effective in the laboratory. And the basic idea is that we need parallel rays to be incident on the slit. For that, we place the source at the focus of a converging lens. The rays coming out are parallel, they are incident on the screen, and then we place another lens in front of the screen and we place a screen in front of this lens at the focal plane of this lens, so that these parallel rays are converged on the screen. So effectively, the source is sent to infinite distance from the slit, the screen is sent to infinite distance from the slit. Alright. Okay. Now we will begin our discussion of Fraunhofer diffraction with diffraction due to a single slit, and then we will slowly move to the more complicated cases of double slit and finally multiple slit. Alright. So this is the setup for studying Fraunhofer diffraction due to a single slit. So you see, this is the plane wave front coming from the source at infinity, and you know how we send the source to infinity, and they are incident on this slit with B, and then different sets of rays are diffracted. For example, this dotted line is a set of rays which are diffracted. This solid line is another set of rays which are diffracted. So different sets of rays are diffracted, parallel rays, and this converging lens converges these sets of parallel rays to different points on the screen, which is kept at the focal plane of this lens. Okay. Now to analyze the intensity pattern, what kind of a pattern will we observe on the screen due to diffraction by a single slit, what we do is we make an assumption. All right. What is that assumption? We assume that the slit is made up of an imaginary set of points, n number of discrete points, a1, a2, etc. up to an, such that the consecutive points are delta distance apart. Okay, what do I mean? I mean, I've magnified this slit for you. So this is the slit of width b. The width between these two points is b, and I imagine that this slit is made up of imaginary points, discrete points, n number of such points, and the distance between any 2 points is delta. Okay, so these points are like a1, a2, a3, etc. up to n, and any 2 consecutive points are delta distance apart. Clear to everybody? So next, therefore, this entire distance is b, and distance between 2 consecutive points, imaginary points, is delta, and there are n such points throughout the slit. Therefore, b must be equal to n minus 1 into delta. But we must remember that at all times n tends to infinity, because n doesn't exist. There are numerous such points. It's a continuous space. So n tends to infinity, and therefore delta tends to 0. Actually, these points are not separated by a delta distance. We have imagined this. So this assumption is subject to the condition that n tends to infinity and delta tends to 0, so that we can write b is equal to n delta for all practical purposes. All right. Remember, we don't know the value of n, we don't know the value of delta. They are assumptions that we have made for our analysis, but this will help us analyze the phenomena, and finally we will get our expressions in terms of this value b. Okay, now let me again magnify any 2 such consecutive points. Okay, ai and ai plus 1. Okay, these 2 points I have again magnified over here. Ai, any ith point, and any I plus 1th point. And say these 2 rays are a particular set of diffracted rays parallel to each other and inclined to the horizontal at an angle theta. What I do is I draw a perpendicular from the ith point onto the second diffracted ray. So what I get is, if this distance, I know I have assumed this distance to be delta, the distance between 2 consecutive points, and let me say that this distance here that I have drawn with this arrow is the path difference delta prime. Path difference between these 2 rays. You can understand why this is the path difference, because this is the perpendicular. So this amount here is the path difference between these 2 rays. So when these 2 rays will superpose on each other, they will have a path difference delta prime between them, and therefore a phase difference of 2 pi by lambda delta prime. So this path difference is given by, you can see from this triangle that this delta prime is given by delta sine theta. If this is theta, This angle is also theta, and thus delta prime is given by delta sine theta, and therefore the phase difference between these two diffracted waves is given by 2 pi by lambda delta sine theta. All right. So the rays coming out from any two consecutive points within this slit is having a phase difference of 2 pi by lambda delta sine theta amongst them. Parallel rays, of course. Okay. So now suppose the disturbance due to light diffracted from the first point A1 is E1 equal to A cos omega t. Disturbance for light from the second point A2 will be behind that from A1 by a phase phi. Okay. So it will be A cos omega t minus phi. All right. Light from the point A3 will be behind that from A1 by a phase 2 phi, because between A3 and A2 there is phi difference, between A2 and A1 there is phi difference. So between A3 and A1 there will be 2 phi difference. So in this manner, the disturbance for light from the nth point AN will be behind that from the first point A1 by a phase n minus 1 phi. So this expression will be A cos omega t minus n minus 1 phi. I want to know whether everybody has understood this, or you want me to repeat this once more. Please tell me, because this understanding is very important before we proceed further. Please unmute yourselves and tell us whether this is all right. Hello? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I mean, do you understand why the phi phase difference is there and what it indicates?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll proceed then. So basically, each disturbance is at a phase phi behind its preceding disturbance, and so the nth disturbance is at a phase n minus 1 into phi from the first disturbance. Now all these set of parallel rays will go and superpose on each other at a particular point P on the screen, so that the resultant field at P due to these particular waves, which have been diffracted at an angle theta with the horizontal, will be obtained by applying the principle of superposition. Okay. So basically we need to add up all these trigonometric terms, n minus 1 up to n minus 1 phi. All right. E1 plus E2 plus E3 up to En. We have to add up n trigonometric terms. Now what we'll do here, we will apply the method of induction for addition of n terms. This analysis has been done vectorially in several books, and you can go ahead and use the vectorial notation if you are comfortable with that. No problem with that. Okay. I have used the trigonometric notation because I feel comfortable with it. So I'll just give you the result of this addition, and this addition is done by the method of induction, and the result is this. If you add n cosine terms, then by method of induction it can be shown that the result of the addition is this: A sine n phi by 2 by sine phi by 2 cos of omega t minus n minus 1 phi by 2. Okay. If you take a close look at this expression, you see that n is the only term that is not there. It is not physically there. We have assumed the slit to be made up of n points, delta distance apart. Okay. It is not actually there. So we have to write this in terms of known parameters. For the time being, this is the resultant disturbance at the point P due to superposition of these n waves, n rays. So clearly we can now write the field E as E theta, E suffix theta cos of omega t minus half n minus 1 phi, where E theta is the expression A sin n phi by 2 sin phi by 2, which, although a sinusoidal term, it is not a function of time. And remember, this is the amplitude of the resultant field. So you can understand that the amplitude is not a constant, it is itself a sinusoid. The amplitude also varies sinusoidally. Okay, so this is the amplitude of the resultant field. And why does it depend on theta? Because phi, the phase in turn, remember, depends on theta. Phi is, remember, phi is given by 2 pi by lambda delta sine theta, where delta is again an assumed quantity, distance between two consecutive imaginary points on the slit. So we must recall over here that n tends to infinity and delta tends to 0, maintaining b equal to n delta always, so that this term n phi by 2, okay, where n phi by 2 is this, where we have written the value of phi, 2 pi by lambda delta sine theta. So this becomes pi by lambda n delta sine theta. But we know that n delta equal to beta. So n phi by 2 can be written as pi b by lambda sine theta. All known quantities, lambda is the wavelength, b is the slit width. So we have written n phi by 2 in terms of pi b by lambda sine theta. Also, phi is equal to 2 pi by lambda delta sine theta, and this delta we can write as b by n, so that when n tends to infinity, phi tends to 0, right? So we can write sine phi by 2 as just phi by 2. So we'll replace the sine phi by 2 term over here by simply phi by 2. So now the expression of E theta, which was A sine n phi by 2 by sine phi by 2, becomes A sine n phi by 2 by just phi by 2, because we've replaced sine phi by 2 by phi by 2, phi by 2 being phi being tending to 0. So what we have done, in place of n phi by 2, we write this result, pi b by lambda sine theta, and in place of phi by 2, from this expression we write pi b by n lambda sine theta. Okay, we take the n to the numerator, and this is the expression that we get, na sine beta by beta. So what is beta? Beta is this. We write pi b by lambda sine theta is equal to beta. Okay, and capital A is equal to n times small a. So small a was the amplitude of each of the rays coming in, diffracted from the slit. So there are n such rays. So the total amplitude is Na given by capital A. Alright. This expression, beta equal to pi b by lambda sine theta, is known as the diffraction parameter. It arises due to diffraction, and we will call this the diffraction parameter. Alright, we will require this in our further discussions of double slit and multiple slit diffraction. So this is the parameter that we are talking about. Okay, so now we are at a position to finally say what the expression of the field will be at any point P on the screen, and it is given by A sine beta by beta cos omega t minus beta. Alright, this beta is the diffraction parameter given by pi b by lambda sine theta. All right. So once again, I'll go back to the expression of beta. Pi b by lambda sine theta. So you can see that pi, b and lambda are all constants for a given setup. So it will only depend on the value of theta, the angle at which the ray has been diffracted. That will decide the nature of the field at the point P where the diffracted rays have superposed. Clear? So that is why the only deciding factor over here for a particular setup is the angle at which the ray has been diffracted. Now we know that intensity is square of the amplitude, so it will be theta squared, and E theta is A sine beta by beta. So the intensity at any point is given by I0 sine squared beta by beta square, where I0 I have written for A square, which is nothing but n square A square. That is the total intensity of the incident wave. I0 is the intensity of the incident wave. All right. So now that we know the expression of the field at a particular point, and we know the expression of the intensity at any point P on the screen, again intensity depends on the value of theta, we are now at a position to see what are the conditions of maxima and minima, because ultimately we need to know the positions of or the conditions of maxima and minima in order to understand what the intensity distribution will be like, what will the fringe pattern look like on the screen. That is basically the intensity distribution. Okay, so we had I equal to I0 sine squared beta by beta square, so that intensity is maximum or minimum when di d beta equal to 0. I is a function of beta, so we know that it will be maximum or minimum when di d beta equal to 0. And so I differentiate the expression of I with respect to beta, and I get this I0 2 sine square beta by beta square inside bracket cos beta by sine beta minus 1 by beta equal to 0. So clearly the condition is given by the product of two terms equal to 0. All right. So there will be two cases for giving the positions of maxima or minima. First, when sine square beta by beta square equal to 0, and second, when cos beta by sine beta minus 1 by beta equal to 0, or in other words, cos beta by sine beta equal to 1 by beta. So let us see what these two cases are, what these two cases result in one by one. First of all, case 1, sine squared beta by beta squared equal to 0. Let's see what happens over here. When does this happen and what is the result on the screen? Now see, sine squared beta by beta squared equal to 0 is possible either when beta equal to 0, then sine beta will be 0 if beta is 0, or if beta not equal to 0. It is possible, right? Beta not equal to 0, but sine beta equal to 0. So there will be two sub cases of the first case, sine squared beta by beta square equal to 0. One when beta equal to 0, and the other when beta not equal to 0. Let us see what happens when beta equal to 0. You can clearly see that when beta is equal to 0, this expression becomes indeterminate, 0 by 0, right? 0 by 0 is indeterminate. So what do we do with this? But beta equal to 0 is clearly a plausible case. We have to address the case and we have to see what happens. Does anybody remember what we do when we have an expression like this? 0 by 0. What mathematical rule do we apply?
And beta
Anyone
evaluator plus
remembers?
minus pi plus minus 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. এই ভ্যালু গুলো
No,
হলে তাহলে
L
ইনডিটারমিনেট
Hopital's
হবে
rule,
না।
ma'am.
L
L
hospitals.
Hopital's rule.
Yes, L hospitals rule. When we have a 0 by 0 condition, undetermined, not determinable, yet it is a physically possible condition, then we apply the mathematical rule of differentiation known as L Hospital's rule. Actually, it is not L Hospital's rule, it is L'Hopital's rule. He was a French mathematician. Spelling is L Hospital, but a
Yes, sir.
pronunciation is L'Hopital. Okay, L'Hopital's rule.
Yes.
So
Yes,
we
ma'am.
apply L'Hopital's rule. What does L'Hopital's rule say? That limit beta tends to 0 sine beta by beta, if this is the condition, then we go on differentiating the numerator and the denominator until the denominator becomes non-zero. All right, just reminding you, in this case it is very easy because we have sine beta by beta. So when we differentiate the numerator and the denominator, numerator becomes cos beta and denominator becomes 1 in the first step. So denominator becomes non-zero in the very first step. So we have limit beta tends to 0 cos beta, and we know that cos 0 is 1. So using L'Hopital's rule, at beta tends to 0, this sine beta by beta is equal to 1. Sine beta by beta equal to 1 means I equal to I0. What does this mean? This means that at these positions where beta equal to 0, we are getting the intensity to be same as the incident intensity. Intensity under this condition has the same value as that of the incident light. All right. When does this happen? Beta equal to 0, which means expression of beta pi b sine theta by lambda equal to 0. Now b is not 0, lambda is not 0. So this is possible only when theta equal to 0. What does theta equal to 0 mean? It means there has been no diffraction at all. So of course, when the light is coming through the slit, through the aperture, some are bent at different angles theta, but some rays straight go and hit the screen. They are not diffracted, theta is 0, so they go and hit the screen directly, and that produces the central maximum. So at theta equal to 0, all the rays that are not diffracted, they are in phase and they produce the same intensity as the incident light, and this results in the formation of the central maximum. All right. So we get one position on the screen that at theta equal to 0, we will get the central maximum. Clear? Next, we move on to the case where beta not equal to 0. Okay. In this expression, even if beta not equal to 0, but sine beta is 0, it will still make sine square beta by beta square equal to 0, which will still be a condition for maximum or minimum. Okay. Beta equal to 0 we can see has given us a maximum. Let's see what beta not equal to 0 gives us. Now beta not equal to 0 means sine beta equal to 0. Beta not equal to 0, sine beta equal to 0. What does that mean? Beta equal to m pi. But m can be only equal to plus or minus 1, 2, 3, etc. Not 0. M equal to 0 will again give me back beta equal to 0, which case we have already studied. Central maximum. So beta not equal to 0, sine beta equal to 0 means beta equal to m pi, where m is some positive or negative integer, not 0. All right. Under these circumstances, what happens to the intensity? Sine beta is 0 when beta not equal to 0 but beta equal to m pi. So we see intensity becomes 0. So when beta equal to m pi, m equal to some positive or negative intensity in integer, the intensity is 0. And when does this happen? When beta expression pi b sine theta by lambda equal to m pi, or in other words, b sine theta equal to m lambda. M not 0. I am repeating this several times in order to get it into your heads. Okay, because m equal to 0 will give me again back the case of central maximum. M not equal to 0, m equal to some positive or negative integer gives me the condition when sine beta is 0, and which renders the intensity to be 0. Intensity 0 means dark fringes. No intensity means no light. So these are the positions of diffraction minima. So from the first case of maxima or minima, we get two conditions on the fringe pattern on the screen. At theta equal to 0, beta becomes 0 and we get the central maximum, and at theta equal to sine inverse m lambda by b, we get sine beta equal to 0 but beta not equal to 0, and this makes the intensity 0, which gives us the diffraction minima. Alright. So from the first case we get two things, the central maximum and the diffraction minima. Now you can see that there is not one but several minima, but there is only one maximum, one central maximum and several diffraction minima. Why several? Because for m equal to plus minus 1 we get one minima on either side of the central maxima. For m equal to plus minus 2 we get another pair of diffraction minima, but central maxima is only occurring at theta equal to 0. So on either side of the central maxima, if we are getting diffraction minima at certain intervals, there must be something else between these minima, right? Try to get what I'm trying to say. If you have two dark fringes, you can see them as two separate dark fringes only if there is a bright fringe in between them. Only if a bright patch of light separates two dark patches of light can you see the two dark patches of light as separate lines. So if there are several diffraction minima for different values of m, plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, etc., then there must be bright patches in between these minima. Otherwise, how will we see the minima? Central maxima is occurring only at theta equal to 0. So there must be some more conditions of maxima apart from the central maxima and the diffraction minima. Have you understood what I am trying to say? Two dark lines can be distinguished only if there is a bright line between them. Two bright lines can be distinguished only if there is a dark line between them. Otherwise, you won't be able to see them as separate lines. So these diffraction minima must be interspersed by some maxima. So we will now check out what these maxima are. Is it the same as the central maxima or is it something different? And for that, we need to study this second case. First case we have already done. The second case, cos beta by sine beta equal to 1 by beta. Okay, so case 2 is cos beta by sine beta equal to 1 by beta, which in turn means tan beta equal to beta. So this is an equation and we need to solve this. Now remember, this kind of an equation is called a transcendental equation. A new term, I guess, for you all. A transcendental equation. It's a mathematical term, and this kind of an equation cannot be solved analytically. The known analytical methods of equation solving cannot give you the roots of this equation. What other way of equation solving do you know other than analytical way? Someone please tell me. How can we solve an equation other than mathematically? Graphical, right. So a transcendental equation has to be solved graphically, and the roots of the points of intersection. So this is basically two expressions. One is y equal to beta and the other is y equal to tan beta. So these two graphs are drawn, and then the points of intersection of these two graphs will give you the roots. So this is what I mean. This straight line passing through the origin is the y equal to beta graph, and you all know the tan beta graph, y equal to tan beta graph. These curved lines are the y equal to tan beta graphs, and you can see that this straight line intersects the y equal to tan beta curve at several points shown by these red points. Now one point of intersection is of course 0, beta equal to 0, which again we will not discuss once more, because we have already seen what is the case given by beta equal to 0. It gives us the central maxima. So we are concerned now with the other points of intersection. Okay. Now the other points of intersection come out to be of such values: beta equal to 1.43 pi, beta equal to 2.46 pi, beta equal to 3.52 I guess pi, etc. So they come in terms of pi because we are measuring this in radians. All right. Now what do we do with these beta values? What do? We put these beta values in the expression of intensity, I0 sine beta by beta, and it is found that for beta equal to 1.43 pi, the first root, I0 is equal to 0.049, I equal to 0.0496 I0. So intensity at this value of beta, this value of beta means basically a particular angle theta. So intensity at this position is only about, see from this expression, only about 5% of the incident intensity I0. Can you understand? Next, for the second root, 2.46 pi, if you put it in the expression of I equal to I0 sine beta by beta, you get I equal to 0.0168 I0. So intensity at this angle of diffraction is only about 1.68% of the incident intensity, not even 2%. So for the very first root, which will be obtained after the central maxima, the intensity is high, it is not 0, so there will be brightness, but it is only about 5% of the incident intensity. For the second position after the central maxima, there is maxima, there is brightness, but intensity is even less than 2% of the incident intensity, and so on. So as you move further away from the central maxima, the intensity decreases drastically, although we get some brightnesses. These are the positions of the secondary maxima. So in the single slit diffraction pattern, you not only get the central maxima and the primary diffraction minima, you also get some secondary maxima. So you can understand how observationally this intensity pattern will be different from the intensity pattern of the diffraction. Just a second, just give me a second. I'll resume my class once more. So the intensity pattern, can you all hear me? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Because I moved to a different room because of some difficulty. All right. So you can see that the intensities at these positions are very feeble, but since we still get some intensity, this is a condition of maximum. All right. However, the intensity decreases drastically. So this is how the diffraction pattern is different from the intensity pattern, from the interference pattern. In interference, if you remember, if you recall Young's double slit interference, then the fringe pattern is simply bright and dark fringes. All bright fringes have the same intensity. On the other hand, in case of single slit Fraunhofer diffraction, you get a very bright central fringe, same brightness as the incident light, but you get more bright fringes on either side of the central fringe, however, with drastically decreasing intensities. Okay, so we are almost at the fag end of our discussion of single slit Fraunhofer diffraction. We now will be able to draw the intensity distribution graph, which is necessary, you know, for all optical phenomena. We have seen so far, therefore, that the intensity distribution has three conditions. One, I equal to I0 at theta equal to 0, right? No change in intensity, same intensity as the incident light. Where? At the central position, where the diffracted rays, in fact, they have not been diffracted, they go straight and hit the screen, and theta equal to 0. This gives the central maximum. Second, we get I equal to 0 at positions of b sine theta equal to m lambda, where mod m equal to 1, 2, 3, etc. So, for all values of theta given by sine inverse m lambda by b, we get the intensity to be 0. So, totally dark. These are the positions of diffraction minima, and you can see that not one but we can get several such diffraction minima. The only limiting condition of how many diffraction minima will we get is given by the limitation of sine. You know, sine theta cannot be more than plus or minus 1. So sine theta over here is equal to m lambda by b. So lambda by b, that ratio will decide how many orders of minima will we get on either side of the central maximum. And finally, we get I equal to I0 sine square beta by beta square at the positions given by tan beta equal to beta. We will solve this transcendental equation graphically and get the roots to get the different values of beta, which in turn will give me the positions in terms of the angle theta, because beta is 2 pi by lambda, pi b by lambda sine theta. And at these positions we see that the intensity is not 0, it is there, but its value is drastically lower, smaller than the central maximum. And these give me the positions of the secondary maxima. So now we are at a position to draw the intensity pattern. All right, you can see this is the intensity pattern, sinusoidal, of course, sine square beta by beta square, only on the positive side because it is sine square. And this is the central maxima at theta equal to 0, and then at theta equal to lambda by b, m equal to 1, you get the first minima, theta equal to sine inverse 2 lambda by d, 2 lambda by b, you get the second minima, and so on. And in between you get the secondary maxima, but as you can see, the peaks of the secondary maxima are considerably lower relative to the peak at the central maxima. So in the laboratory, this is what we see. We have used the slit with B, here they have written A. So this is the slit and this is the intensity pattern. So we get a bright central maxima, brightness same as the incident light, and then we have dark bands where I is 0, and in between we have these bright patches but with severely decreasing intensity as we go to either side. So this is the intensity distribution graph for Fraunhofer single slit diffraction, and you can easily now relate to the fact that we do not observe diffraction pattern all the time. For example, you have a dark room and you have an open window. So sunlight is coming in. Will you observe diffraction pattern on the floor? Can someone tell me why we will not observe the diffraction pattern on the floor through this open window? Anyone?
मैम मुझे स्लिट विड्थ টাকে অনেক কম হতে হবে, খুব ছোট হতে
Exactly.
হবে।
Slit width টাকে অনেক কম হতে হবে। When this is an open window, first of all, bending and all that is there. Secondly, we observe only the central maximum. The central maximum fills up the entire space. All right, and it is so bright that these cannot be observed. The values of the secondary maxima, even if they are present, are so feeble that we cannot see them, we cannot distinguish them from the positions of the minima. And central maxima has the same value as the incident light. So in general, when we have a large slit, diffraction is of course occurring because light is still facing an obstacle, but we do not see it because we see only the central maxima. All right, so basically in this pattern you can identify the peak is the central maxima. These drops where intensity becomes 0 are the diffraction minima, and these smaller peaks on either side of the central maxima are the secondary maxima. Okay, so that more or less covers Fraunhofer diffraction for a single slit, and after this we will move on to the double slit, but let us not start that today. In our next class, scheduled for next Friday, of course, we will start with double slit. Double slit is only since we have done the single slit thoroughly, so the analysis of the double slit is just a step ahead using the results of the single slit, so we won't take much time, and we will do single slit and we will move on to multiple slit and finish off with Fraunhofer diffraction. Okay, so by next class I suppose we will be able to complete Fraunhofer diffraction, and then of course we will have to move over to Fresnel diffraction. Okay, all right, so if you have any questions you can ask me. I will send you the PPT of this